In the vast reaches of the galaxy, an important event was taking place on a neutral space station called Zenith Point. It was a place where species from all across the universe came to meet, discuss, and negotiate peace. Today, 3 alien princesses were traveling there to represent their powerful empires. They were leaders in their own right, feared by many and respected by all. But despite their strength, they had one shared concern. They were dreading the moment they would meet the human representative at the summit. The Terran Alliance, though new to the galactic scene, had quickly gained a reputation, but not for reasons the princesses found comforting. Rumors had spread about humans. They were known as carnivorous creatures, primitive, bloodthirsty, and dangerous. Some said that humans were nothing more than savage animals who used strength and cunning to dominate whatever they could. The princesses had been briefed on the human delegation, but none of them believed the reports could be true. After all, no species could be as aggressive as the humans were said to be, right? Lishar, the princess of the Solveran Empire, was the first to voice her discomfort. She was tall, her skin a deep shade of violet, with sharp features that reflected the sharpness of her mind. The Solverans were an ancient, proud people, known for their wisdom and sophisticated technology. Their empire had ruled for centuries, and they had no intention of letting any young, reckless species like humans get in their way. This human representative, Ethan Drake, Lishar said, her voice calm but filled with concern. He's nothing more than a brute. I've heard that they hunt their own kind to prove their strength. I don't think we should trust them. Beside her, Kizani, the princess of the Torvar, nodded in agreement. The Torvar were a fierce, warrior-like species. Their people had survived wars and catastrophes that would have destroyed lesser civilizations. Kizani herself had led countless battles. She was known for her strength and fearlessness. She had heard similar rumors about the Terrans, and she was just as uneasy. We'll have to be careful with them, Kizani said, her deep blue eyes narrowing. I've heard stories about their bloodlust. They say they are like wild animals, but with the intelligence to be dangerous. Finally, Mirian, the princess of the Aetherian Empire, spoke up. The Aetherian were an elegant and ancient race known for their mastery over energy manipulation and interdimensional travel. Their technology was far ahead of most, and they rarely interacted with the rest of the galaxy. But Mirian, with her radiant skin that shimmered like starlight, had always been curious about humanity, despite the troubling rumors. I understand your concerns, Mirian said softly, her voice almost musical. But we should not judge an entire species based on what we've heard. We need to see for ourselves. We cannot assume that humans are as dangerous as we've been told. Lishar and Kizani exchanged uneasy glances. They had both heard of Mirian's curiosity about the human race, but it was hard to dismiss the fear they had been raised with. The stories of human aggression had shaped their opinions for so long. It was hard to let go of that fear. Soon, their ships arrived at Zenith Point, and the 3 princesses were escorted to the grand hall where the summit was being held. The neutral station was vast and bustling with beings from all corners of the galaxy. Creatures of all shapes and sizes roamed the corridors, their conversations creating a hum of activity. The princesses, however, paid little attention to the surroundings. Their minds were focused on the meeting ahead. As they walked through the hall, the tension between them was palpable. They were each worried about one thing: the moment they would have to face Commander Ethan Drake, the human representative. When they entered the main chamber, they were greeted by a group of delegates, including Ethan. The moment Lishar laid eyes on him, she stiffened. Ethan stood tall, his posture confident. He was wearing a simple but professional uniform, and his features were striking in their ruggedness. He had dark hair, sharp eyes, and a strong jawline. He looked human, nothing like the bloodthirsty predator they had been led to expect. Ethan smiled and greeted them warmly. "Princesses, it's an honor to meet you all. I look forward to our discussions." His tone was polite, but the princesses couldn't shake the unease that crept up their spines. Lishar's eyes narrowed slightly. His demeanor was too calm, too confident. There was something about him that unsettled her, as if he were masking something. Likewise, Kazani said curtly, though her voice was careful, "Let's get to the matters at hand." As they sat down to begin the summit, the tension remained. Ethan, however, seemed completely at ease. His calm demeanor only heightened the princess's anxiety. There was something about his presence, something that made them question everything they had heard about humans. Was he really as dangerous as they had been told? Or was there more to this species than they had realized? The meeting began, but the princesses couldn't help but wonder. Would the human prove to be the savage they had expected? Or would they be forced to reconsider everything they had been taught about humanity? The summit room at Zenith Point was filled with the quiet hum of nervous energy. The delegates from various parts of the galaxy had taken their seats, ready to begin the most important discussions in galactic history. But there was one thing the three princesses could not shake off: the presence of the human representative, Commander Ethan Drake. They had never met a human before, but everything they had heard about them made them uneasy. The room, with its smooth metallic walls and floating holograms, looked like any other conference room in the galaxy. The atmosphere was formal, but tension lingered in the air. The princesses sat across from Ethan, watching him carefully. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes were sharp, taking in the details of the room, the delegates, and most importantly, the princesses. Lishar, the princess of the Solveran Empire, couldn't stop watching him. Her violet skin glimmered in the soft lighting, and her eyes were narrowed, studying every move he made. The Solverans were known for their wisdom and their careful approach to diplomacy. They had never been quick to make alliances, and they preferred to wait and observe before making any decisions. But now, Lishar found herself growing increasingly suspicious of this human. He looks too calm, Lishar thought to herself. How can he be so relaxed in a room full of people he's never met, when they are all waiting for him to make a mistake? It's almost as if he knows something we don't. Kazani, the princess of the Torvar Empire, was even more on edge. The Torvar were a race of fierce warriors, with skin as hard as steel and eyes that could pierce through anything in their path. They had survived many battles, and Kazani had personally led her people into countless conflicts. Her instincts told her that something was off. She had fought alongside allies before, but never had she felt such discomfort toward a potential partner. Stay focused, Kazani told herself, but the words didn't calm the storm in her mind. Humans are not to be trusted. We will deal with them, but only if we must. Mirian, the princess of the Aetherian Empire, sat silently, her gaze fixed on Ethan. She was not as tense as the other two, though the tension was still present. The Aetherian were a peaceful race, known for their wisdom and mastery over energy manipulation. They had always sought peace and understanding between species, and Mirian had hoped this summit would be another opportunity to foster cooperation. But the stories about humans had made her nervous. Even she couldn't shake the doubts creeping into her mind. Ethan noticed the princess's discomfort, but he didn't show it. He knew that the rumors about humans were widespread, and many of the species present in the room were skeptical of his kind. He couldn't blame them. After all, they had never met a human before. The Terran Alliance was still young, and humanity had yet to prove itself on the galactic stage. Still, Ethan remained confident. He had been trained for moments like this, moments where diplomacy and understanding were the keys to success. He knew that the best way to earn trust was through openness and honesty, and that was exactly what he intended to do. "We're here to discuss the future of our galaxy," Ethan said, breaking the silence. His voice was calm and steady, but it carried a weight that seemed to draw the attention of everyone in the room. "And to find a way to work together for the good of all." His words were simple, but they carried a sense of seriousness that couldn't be ignored. The princesses, despite their reservations, listened carefully. Lishar raised an eyebrow, her sharp mind processing the information. "That's it," she thought. "Just words. What does he expect to accomplish with such vague statements?" Kazani wasn't so quick to dismiss him. Her experience told her that there was always more beneath the surface. She had seen many leaders, many politicians, speak in grand terms, only to reveal their true intentions later. But there was something about Ethan that was different. His eyes didn't have the same calculating look that most diplomats wore. Miriam, however, felt a flicker of curiosity. He speaks of working together, she mused. Is it possible that this human is truly interested in peace, or is he hiding something? As the meeting continued, Ethan spoke about the goals of the Terran Alliance: peaceful cooperation, the sharing of technology, and the promise of mutual protection. The princesses, though skeptical, were forced to listen. They had heard similar promises from other species, and many of those promises had been broken over the years. But there was something about the human's words that felt different, something about the way he carried himself that kept them guessing. At times, Ethan would glance up from his datapad and meet their eyes, almost as if he were trying to gauge their reactions. The princesses, trying to remain stoic, could feel his gaze on them, but they refused to show any sign of weakness. "We are willing to cooperate, but only if our interests align," Lisher said coolly, her tone sharp as ever. Ethan nodded. "I understand. But I believe that, with time, our interests will align. We just need to give it a chance." The conversation continued, but the princesses couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that Ethan was studying them just as carefully as they were studying him. The more they spoke, the more they realized they weren't sure what to make of this human. He didn't seem like the savage they had been warned about, but that only left them with more questions. What was he really after? Could they trust him? Or were the rumors true, and humanity was a dangerous force waiting to strike? The tension in the room remained thick, and the princesses were left wondering if they would ever truly understand the humans, or if they were simply missing something that they would regret later. The summit had been going on for hours, and the tension in the room was palpable. The delegates from various parts of the galaxy were beginning to speak more freely, but the princesses could not shake the feeling that something was off. Every time they glanced at Ethan, the human representative, they saw a calm confidence in his eyes. It only made them more uneasy. As the meeting progressed, the discussion shifted to the topic of sharing technology and resources. The Terran Alliance had offered to share their advancements with other species in exchange for mutual protection. It seemed like a reasonable proposal, but to the princesses, it felt too good to be true. Lishar, the princess of the Solveran Empire, sat back in her chair, her violet eyes scanning Ethan carefully. The Solverans were a proud race, with a history of ruling over many worlds. They had always been cautious when dealing with other species, preferring to keep to themselves. The idea of cooperating with a species as young and unpredictable as humans made her uneasy. This proposal, it doesn't sit right with me, Lishar thought, her sharp mind racing. Humans don't offer things for free. They must have an agenda, something they're not telling us. Kizani, the princess of the Torvar Empire, was just as skeptical. The Torvar were warriors, strong and battle-hardened. They respected power and strength above all else. And while the Terran Alliance had proven itself in battle, Kizani couldn't help but feel that Ethan was hiding something. The way he spoke about peace and cooperation seemed too idealistic, too easy. Why would they offer such a thing without expecting something in return? Kizani wondered, her blue eyes narrowing in suspicion. What are they planning? Miriam, the princess of the Aetherian Empire, was more open-minded than the others. The Aetherian were known for their peaceful nature and their desire to bring balance to the galaxy. Miriam had hoped that this summit would be a chance to forge a new path forward for all species, a path of cooperation. But even she couldn't ignore the growing doubts in her mind. The more she listened to Ethan, the more she wondered if his intentions were as pure as he claimed. I wish I could believe him, Miriam thought, her fingers gently brushing the edge of the holographic table. But something feels off. Is he really interested in peace, or is he playing a larger game? Ethan noticed the growing tension among the princesses. He could see it in their eyes. The suspicion, the wariness. He understood why they were cautious. Humanity had a reputation, after all. He had heard the rumors, too. The humans were savage, bloodthirsty creatures who couldn't be trusted. But that wasn't who he was, and he wasn't about to let their doubts stop him from achieving his goals. "We're not asking for anything in return, Princess Lishar," Ethan said, his voice steady and confident. "The Terran Alliance is offering this cooperation because we believe in a better future for all of us. We want to work together, not conquer anyone." Lishar raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "And why should we believe that? Your people have only recently begun to rise to power. You don't have the right to demand anything." Ethan's eyes locked with hers. "We don't demand anything. We simply offer our help, with no strings attached. It's up to you whether or not you accept it. But if you do, I believe we can accomplish great things together." The room grew quiet as Lishar, Kizani, and Marion exchanged glances. There was a moment of silence, where it seemed as though they were all trying to figure out what to do next. Ethan's words were sincere, but they didn't trust him. They couldn't. After all, they had heard the rumors, and it was hard to ignore the stories about humanity's violent past. "We can't just take his word for it," Kizani said, breaking the silence. "Humans are dangerous. We have to be careful. But if we don't consider his offer, we risk pushing them away," Marion replied, her voice soft but firm. "We don't know what they could do if they feel rejected." Lishar sighed, her sharp eyes flicking back to Ethan. She was caught in a difficult position. On one hand, she didn't trust him. On the other, she knew that the galaxy was changing, and if humanity could be trusted, they could be a powerful ally. But there was no way of knowing for sure. "I don't like it," Lishar muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. "But we have to proceed carefully." The conversation continued, but the princesses were no longer focused on the words being spoken. They were lost in their own thoughts, weighing the pros and cons of the situation. Ethan's words echoed in their minds, but they were not convinced. How could they trust someone they knew so little about? How could they trust a species with such a violent reputation? Ethan, sensing their growing unease, took a different approach. Instead of continuing to push for cooperation, he began asking them questions about their cultures, their people, their values. He showed interest in who they were, not just what they could offer. He listened carefully, making sure they knew that he respected their individuality. "We want to understand your people," Ethan said. "We don't want to change your cultures or force you to conform to ours. We just want to learn from each other, share our knowledge, and build something better together." The princesses were taken aback by his words. No one had ever spoken to them like that before. Most diplomats were eager to push their own agendas, but Ethan seemed genuinely interested in hearing what they had to say. For a moment, the princesses began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, the human representative was different from what they had been told. But doubts still lingered. They had to be cautious. They had to be sure. The tension in the room continued to rise, and the princesses realized that the future of the galaxy hung in the balance. Could they trust Ethan and the Terran Alliance, or would their fears be proven true? The summit was at a turning point. The princesses had been carefully considering Ethan's words, but despite the warmth in his tone and the sincerity in his eyes, doubt still lingered. The discussions had gone in circles, and each princess was stuck in her own thoughts, unsure of whether to trust the human representative. The room had grown quieter as the conversation slowed. Ethan noticed the subtle change in the atmosphere, the way the princesses had pulled back slightly, as if they were waiting for something. A sign, a reason to either accept or reject him. He couldn't blame them. The galaxy had taught all of them to be wary, but Ethan knew that if he didn't do something soon, this moment might slip away, and they might never give humanity a chance. "I'm glad we're having this discussion," Ethan said after a pause. His voice was steady, but there was a certain edge to it now, a hint of frustration that had been building throughout the meeting. "But we can't keep going around in circles. I've been listening, and I know you have concerns. But what I'm offering is simple. We work together. We help each other. That's all. Lisher leaned forward, her violet eyes sharp. It's not that simple, she said, her voice laced with caution. We've seen how quickly alliances can fall apart. The history of the galaxy is filled with broken promises and betrayed trust. What makes you think you're any different from those who've come before? Ethan sighed. He knew this would be the hardest part. The galaxy was full of distrust. Empires had risen and fallen. Wars had torn through civilizations, and alliances were often only as strong as the next opportunity to break them. But humanity had something to prove, something the princesses didn't yet see. You're right, Ethan admitted, his tone softer now. The past is filled with betrayal. But that's why we need to do something different. We're not asking for blind trust. We're asking for a chance to show you who we really are. I'm not asking you to forget the past, but we can't be defined by it. Kizani, the princess of the Torvar Empire, shifted in her seat, her blue eyes studying him intently. The Torvar were not a people who believed in second chances. In their world, if someone failed once, they were discarded. There was no room for mistakes. But Kizani had spent years watching species make promises and then break them, and it made her wonder whether Ethan's words were anything more than the sweet talk of a politician. You speak of giving humans a chance, Kizani said, her voice low. But what if you're just like the others? What if after we lower our guard, you take advantage of us? Mirian, the princess of the Aetherian Empire, watched the exchange with interest. The Aetherian were a peaceful race, known for their ability to manipulate energy, and they valued diplomacy above all. It was why Mirian had always believed in working toward peace, despite the risks. She wanted to believe Ethan, to believe that humanity could be trusted, but her heart wasn't as convinced as her mind. The growing unease she felt wasn't something she could ignore. Perhaps what Kizani says is true, Mirian murmured, glancing at the others. Perhaps we should be cautious. But also, we can't let fear control us. If we shut ourselves off from the galaxy, we lose the chance to shape it. Lisher nodded slowly. But we also need to protect ourselves. If humanity proves to be a threat, we will have to face that reality. Ethan could see the tension was thick, and he knew that any wrong move could ruin everything. He had to convince them that humanity was different, that this wasn't just a ploy to gain power. He had to appeal to their sense of reason and their desire for stability. Listen, I understand your fears, Ethan said. You've lived through the fall of empires and the betrayal of allies. But we're not trying to conquer anyone. The Terran Alliance wants to build something lasting, something that benefits all of us. He paused and looked directly at Lisher. I'm not asking you to forget the past, but I'm asking you to be willing to consider the future. We could all benefit from what we could create together. Imagine what humanity could offer to your people. Think of the knowledge we can share, the opportunities for progress. For the first time, the princesses seemed to hesitate. They were still not fully convinced, but they weren't as closed off as before. The words Ethan spoke weren't just empty promises. There was a certain strength in his voice, a strength that made them wonder if humanity could indeed offer something different. What kind of progress are you talking about? Kizani asked. Her arms were crossed, but her tone was more thoughtful now. We've seen many species offer progress, only to pull back once they've gained what they want. We're offering cooperation, not control, Ethan replied quickly. The Terran Alliance has just started to build itself, but we're not here to dominate. We're here to offer something that the galaxy needs, something that's been missing for a long time. True collaboration. There's power in working together, in sharing knowledge, and in helping one another. Lisher raised her eyebrows, considering his words. You speak as though cooperation has never existed before, she said, her voice still sharp. Are you suggesting that your way is the only way? Ethan smiled, though it was a small smile. No, I'm not saying it's the only way. I'm saying it's a new way. We have the potential to build something different, something that doesn't end in betrayal or war. But it won't happen unless we take a chance on each other. The princesses exchanged glances again, and the silence in the room grew heavy. Ethan's words had gotten under their skin, but the question still remained. Could they trust him? Could they trust humanity? But perhaps for the first time, they weren't so sure they could ignore the possibility. The summit had reached an impasse. The princesses had listened to Ethan, heard his arguments, and considered his words carefully. The tension in the room was thick, like a fog that refused to lift. The princesses sat in silence, weighing the future of the galaxy in their minds. Could they really take the risk of trusting humanity? Could they take the chance of building something new, something different? Ethan's words had shaken their resolve, but the doubts still remained. Trust was not something that could be given easily, especially not in the galaxy that had seen so much conflict, betrayal, and disappointment. But something was changing within the princesses. The idea of cooperation, the idea of working together for a common good, had begun to take root. Lishar, the princess of the Solveran Empire, had always been cautious. She had watched as empires fell, and she had seen the consequences of misplaced trust. The Solverans were a race of thinkers, strategists, and planners. They didn't act impulsively, yet there was a part of her that found Ethan's words strangely appealing. She hadn't expected this kind of openness from a human, not after all the stories she had heard. I still don't trust them, Lishar thought, her fingers lightly tapping the armrest of her chair. But maybe it's worth considering. Kizani, the princess of the Torvar Empire, was the most reluctant of all. The Torvar were a proud warrior race, and they valued strength above all. They respected power, and they didn't take kindly to weakness or vulnerability. Ethan's calm demeanor, his peaceful talk, had grated on Kizani's nerves. She wasn't used to seeing leaders who spoke of cooperation and peace. For her, those words sounded like a mask hiding a deeper agenda. Still, something about Ethan had started to chip away at her skepticism. He wasn't like the other diplomats she had met. He didn't use trickery or false promises. His approach was simple, too simple, maybe. But the more she listened, the more she realized that humanity might not be as dangerous as she had been taught to believe. The risk is high, Kizeni thought, her blue eyes narrowing. But perhaps it's time to take a different approach. Mirian, the princess of the Aetherian Empire, had been the most open-minded from the start. The Aetherian valued peace, balance, and wisdom. They believed that all species could live in harmony if they truly understood each other. It was why Mirian had longed for a future where differences were celebrated, not fought over. She had hoped that the summit would bring about this kind of change, and now, in this moment of uncertainty, she found herself torn. Ethan's words had struck a chord with her, and she couldn't help but wonder if perhaps humanity was the missing piece in the galaxy's complicated puzzle. She had always believed in the power of unity, and Ethan seemed to be offering that in a way no one else had. But was it enough? Could she trust him, or was she just hoping for something that might never come? The galaxy needs change, Mirian thought. And maybe, just maybe, humanity could be the catalyst for that change. The princesses were deep in thought when Ethan finally spoke again, his voice breaking the silence. "I understand your hesitation," he said quietly. "I know this isn't easy, but I'm asking for a chance, a real chance, not just to prove myself, but to prove that humanity isn't what you think it is. We don't want to dominate or control anyone. We want to build something new, something better." His words seemed to hang in the air, and for a moment, no one spoke. The silence was deafening, broken only by the soft hum of the room's energy systems. The princesses exchanged glances, their minds racing. Finally, Lishar broke the silence. "I still don't trust you," she said, her voice cold and firm. "But I'm willing to consider your offer. For now." Kizani's eyes widened in surprise. She had expected Lishar to reject Ethan outright, but the Solveran princess had surprised her. "You'll risk it?" Kizani asked, her voice a mix of disbelief and curiosity. Lishar nodded slowly. "Yes, but I'm not doing it for you, Ethan. I'm doing it for the future of the galaxy. We all need something new, something that isn't built on the same broken promises of the past. I'm willing to see where this leads." Miriam looked at Lishar, then at Kazani, and finally at Ethan. She could see the uncertainty in their eyes, but she could also see the spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this could work. She didn't want to be the one who held back progress, who kept the galaxy stuck in the past. If humanity could truly offer a new way forward, then she had to give it a chance. "I agree with Lishar," Miriam said, her voice calm but filled with conviction. "I think we should take this opportunity. We have to try, at least. The galaxy can't move forward if we keep looking backward." Kazani was quiet for a long time, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She was still wary, still uncertain, but she couldn't deny that a part of her wanted to see if this alliance could work. After what felt like an eternity, Kazani spoke. "I'm not promising anything," she said, her voice still guarded. "But I'll go along with it, for now. We'll see where this takes us." Ethan's eyes lit up, though he remained composed. He had expected resistance, but this was progress. The princesses hadn't accepted him fully, but they were willing to give humanity a chance. And that was all he needed. "We'll prove ourselves," Ethan said with a small smile. "I promise you that." And so, for the first time, the princesses of the galaxy agreed to a tentative partnership with humanity. The path ahead was uncertain, and the risks were high, but there was a glimmer of hope in the air. Perhaps, just perhaps, this new alliance could be the beginning of a brighter future for all. The decision had been made. It wasn't final, not yet, but it was a beginning. The princesses had agreed to give humanity a chance. Ethan knew this wasn't a victory. It was a fragile first step. Trust had been extended, but it was thin, like a rope that could snap at any moment if they weren't careful. But for now, it was enough. The atmosphere in the room was different now. Gone was the tense silence of before. There was a quiet buzz of activity as delegates began to prepare for the next phase. The princesses had agreed to work with humanity on a trial basis. They would share knowledge, and humanity would offer some of its advanced technology in exchange for cooperation. It wasn't much, but it was a start. It was a spark of hope in a galaxy that had grown cold and distrustful. Ethan stood by the large window in the meeting room, looking out over the sprawling cityscape. Ships moved between towering spires, and the distant hum of the city was almost comforting. This was the heart of the galaxy, a place where empires had risen and fallen. And yet, in this moment, it felt like something new was beginning. Humanity had a chance to be a part of that change. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching. He turned to find the three princesses entering the room. They walked in together, their regal presence filling the space. Their eyes were still cautious, but there was something else there now. Something that hadn't been there before. A hint of curiosity. "We've agreed to your terms, Ethan," Lishar said, her voice cool but not unkind. "But this is just a trial. We're not fully committing to anything yet. We'll need time to see what humanity can bring to the table." Ethan nodded, understanding. He didn't expect anything more than this. Trust couldn't be rushed. He had to prove himself, and proving himself would take time. He stepped forward and met their gazes. "I understand," he said, "and I'm not asking for anything more than a chance to show you what we can offer. This is just the beginning. We'll take it one step at a time." Kazani, the princess of the Torvar Empire, eyed him carefully, her arms crossed. The Torvar were warriors, a people who valued strength and respect above all else. She was the most skeptical of the princesses, but even she had to admit that there was something compelling about Ethan's determination. "You'd better prove it," Kazani said, her tone blunt but not hostile. "If we find that you're not what you say you are, we won't hesitate to pull back." Ethan met her gaze with confidence. "You won't be disappointed," he said. "I promise." Miriam, the princess of the Aetherian Empire, was the most serene of the group. She had always believed in peace and cooperation, and her faith in those ideals had been shaken in recent years. But Ethan's words had given her hope. She saw a potential in him, in humanity, that no one else had shown her. "Perhaps we should start small," Marian suggested, her voice soft but firm. "If we can find common ground in something simple, it may build trust. Maybe a research project, or something to test the waters." "That's a good idea," Ethan agreed. "We can begin with something that benefits everyone. A shared effort, something practical. That way, we can see how we work together." Lisher nodded thoughtfully. "I'll speak with my advisors," she said. "We'll determine which projects we can begin collaborating on. But don't mistake this for an invitation to dominate, Ethan. We're watching." Ethan smiled, a small, knowing smile. "I wouldn't dream of it. This isn't about domination. It's about cooperation." With that, the princesses turned and left the room. Ethan stood alone for a moment, letting their words sink in. This was it, the first step in what could be a long journey. He had their attention, but now he had to prove that humanity was worthy of their trust. The days that followed were a whirlwind of meetings and discussions. Representatives from the Terran Alliance worked closely with the princesses to find common ground, setting up a joint research project that would explore new methods of energy production. It was something practical, something that could benefit all of them. Ethan had suggested it because it wasn't overly ambitious, and it didn't require them to put too much trust in one another right away. But it would be a start. Ethan worked tirelessly alongside the princesses, staying late into the evenings and working through countless details. The princesses were cautious, but they didn't shut him out. They tested his patience, pushed his ideas to their limits, and challenged his every assumption. And through it all, Ethan remained calm, determined to show them that humanity was capable of more than they expected. But despite the progress they were making, there were still moments of doubt. Lisher, in particular, was still unsure about the entire arrangement. She had agreed to the project, but only because it seemed like the safest option. She didn't fully trust Ethan yet, and she wasn't sure if she ever would. The idea of cooperating with humanity was still a risk that could end in disaster. Kazani, too, remained skeptical. She had seen too many leaders speak of peace and cooperation only to turn on their allies when it suited them. Her people didn't believe in weakness, and cooperation was often seen as a form of vulnerability. She wasn't sure what to make of Ethan, but she couldn't deny that he had earned some measure of respect. Marian was the only one who truly believed that this could work. She had always seen the potential for peace, even in the most unlikely places. But even she had moments of doubt, moments when she wondered if they were simply deluding themselves. Still, the project was moving forward. The first results were promising, and for the first time in a long while, there was a sense of cautious optimism in the air. The princesses had agreed to keep moving forward, one step at a time. Ethan knew the journey wasn't over, but at least they were on the right path. It would take time, and there would be challenges ahead. But for now, humanity had its first real chance to prove itself, and Ethan was determined to make sure they didn't waste it. The first phase of the project was now complete. The results were in, and the princesses were gathered once again in the grand meeting hall. The atmosphere was different this time, calmer, more open. There was no longer a heavy air of suspicion hanging over them. It was clear that something had shifted. The princesses had seen the results of humanity's cooperation, and though they remained cautious, they were no longer as doubtful. Ethan stood at the front of the room, his eyes on the three princesses as they entered. He had been through many negotiations, many challenges, but none quite like this. The stakes were higher than he had ever faced before. The future of the galaxy, the future of humanity's place in it, rested on the delicate balance they had created. Lishar, the princess of the Solveran Empire, entered first, her sharp eyes scanning the room. She had always been the most wary, but even she couldn't deny that something had changed. The results from the joint project had been promising. There were challenges, yes, but the potential for what they could accomplish together was now undeniable. Kazani followed, her blue eyes cool but thoughtful. The Torvar princess had been the hardest to win over. Yet there was a slight shift in her posture now. She hadn't been convinced that humanity could be trusted, but the project's success had made her pause. Maybe, just maybe, there was something more to Ithan and his people than she had thought. Mirian, the princess of the Aetherian Empire, entered last, her expression serene as always. Of the three, she had been the most hopeful, the one who had truly believed in the possibility of cooperation. But even she knew that hope alone wasn't enough. Results were what mattered, and the results were starting to speak for themselves. Ithan stood tall as the princesses took their seats, his heart beating faster as he prepared to hear their thoughts on the project's outcome. The room was filled with the hum of quiet conversation, and he could feel the tension in the air. This was the moment of truth. Would the princesses accept the potential humanity offered, or would they pull back? "I trust you're all satisfied with the results," Ithan said, his voice steady. "We've completed the initial phase, and the data is clear. Our combined efforts have led to advancements in energy production that we couldn't have achieved alone. This is just the beginning, but it's a good start." Lishar was the first to speak. "I'll admit, the results were better than I expected," she said, her voice measured but not dismissive. "The energy efficiency improvements are impressive, but one successful project doesn't prove that you can be trusted on a larger scale." Kizani crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing slightly. "This is just one small step. It's not enough to change my mind about humanity. I'm still not convinced that you're not just using this to further your own goals. We've seen it before. Alliances that start off with good intentions and end in betrayal." Ithan nodded, understanding their concerns. He had known this would be the hardest part, proving that humanity wasn't interested in taking advantage of them, but in building something real, something lasting. "I understand your hesitation," he said quietly, "and I'm not asking you to trust us completely right now. What I'm asking for is time. Time to prove that we're different. Time to show you that humanity doesn't want to conquer or control. It wants to cooperate and build a future where we all succeed." Mirian smiled softly, her eyes filled with warmth. "You've shown us that it's possible, but it's only a start. We need more than just good results. We need a commitment. We need to see that you're willing to stay the course, even when things get difficult." Ithan looked at each of them, his gaze steady. "I'm here for the long run. Humanity is committed to this, to working with all of you. We understand that trust is earned, not given. And I'm willing to work as hard as it takes to earn that trust." Lishar leaned back in her chair, her fingers drumming lightly on the armrest. "You've got our attention, Ithan. But that's all you've got right now. We'll continue the project, but we'll be watching closely. If you falter, if you betray this trust, you won't get a second chance." Kizani's eyes softened slightly, though her tone remained firm. "We'll see where this leads, but don't mistake our caution for weakness. We won't hesitate to act if we feel threatened." Mirian nodded, her voice full of hope. "For now, we'll continue forward. Let's see what we can accomplish together. There's a lot of potential here." Ithan's heart lifted, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a glimmer of optimism. The princesses weren't all in yet, but they were willing to continue. That was progress. It was the opportunity humanity needed to prove itself. He knew there would be more challenges ahead, more tests to face, but for the first time, he felt like they had a real chance. "Thank you," Ithan said, his voice full of sincerity. "I promise you, we won't waste this opportunity. We'll prove ourselves worthy of your trust." As the meeting came to a close, the princesses stood and made their way to the exit. There were still doubts, still uncertainties, but there was also something else, something that hadn't been there before. Hope. The seeds of something new had been planted. Whether it would grow into something lasting, something strong, was yet to be seen. But for the first time, it seemed possible. Ithan watched them leave, feeling the weight of the moment settle in. The journey wasn't over, but today they had taken another step forward, and that was enough.